Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart and welcome to another Epic Battles Waterloo painting tutorial. So this one's been on the cards for a while and I've had lots and lots of requests for it in comments and videos, in messages, and apologies that it's taken so long for me to get this out. There's been lots of things. I just had an incredibly busy start to the year, family holiday, loads of work stuff, just everything under the sun, and painting videos, especially when it's strips of line troops like this, are just more time consuming than pretty much any other video I do. So it takes a lot longer to paint them when I'm recording the video, and it takes a lot longer to edit as well, and speed the bits up and add the music and things like that for when I've sped it up and I'm not talking. So it's just one of those things. I love doing them. I know they're really popular on the channel. And I'd do just painting videos maybe or nearly just painting videos if I could, but it's just the way it is. But anyway, that's a minute of the video gone already with me just garbling about that. But we are here. So this is the French Epic Scale. So if you're new to Epic Scale, it's by Warlord Games. They've produced American Civil War and now Waterloo. So Napoleonic miniatures, British, French and Prussians are just coming out soon as I'm recording this. And they're 13.5mm to the eye scale. So they're not quite 15mm, but they're slightly bigger than 10 or 12mm that's out there, so they don't quite match with those. I love them. Not everyone does. I think they're fantastic. I like what they do, and they're plastic, which is great for these kind of things. So we finally get around to the French, having already done the British. Let me talk you through what the plan is for the video. So the plan is to show you completely how to paint this. About halfway through, it will be just kind of single coats, mainly of contrast paint. At that stage you can stop there, and then I continue on and show you how I highlight up afterwards to a decent tabletop standard, but nothing more than that. Hopefully that will be what most people need. If you want to do any more than that, obviously you're probably not watching this video anyway, I imagine. Second thing, so you'll see the miniatures already prepared using what looks like a white prime or a grey prime, depending on your eyesight or the screen you're viewing it on. It's actually a Zenithal prime, which gives you a pre-shade or pre-highlight, depending on which way around you want to think about it, which aids your painting of the miniature, already put some shadow in. And the reason I do that is because I base coat from this scale almost entirely in Citadel contrast paints now, with added army paint or speed paint for certain things. Now the reason I do that is they are thin, they're like glazes, and when you paint them over a model that's already has some shade and highlight built in as a grayscale, almost like a black and white film, you get natural shading and natural highlights built in just from one layer of paint. I then tend to go in and do a little touch up afterwards and do a few more highlights to it, really tidy it up and make it pop. Now I'm not going to show you how I do the Zenithal highlight. I will pop a link in the video now, which I've mentioned many times, to show you how I did it on the British thing, the British strip. It's a black prime though, and then a white airbrushed white over the top down. There's a bit of a dusting really, so you still see some of the black going through, and then I do a bit of a dry brush afterwards to really pick out the detail on these smaller miniatures, and that's how I do it for Epic Scale. Now I'm going to do two videos for the French infantry, standard infantry. This one is the standard field dress, the blue jackets. There will be a second video, a bit like I did with the British, and that will cover greatcoats and the command. So to start off with the French, I'm going to be using speed paint. I'm going to be using the Cloudburst blue. Now this came out with the mega paint set, not the smaller starter. And some of you may have watched the sort of review I did of speed paint, and it was a review based very much on how good they would be to paint epic miniatures. And there was a problem with the red I had where it reactivated, so that after you painted the red, trying to paint the white straps and things afterwards, it turned pink, tended to bleed through. Even when it had dried for 24 hours or so, I was still having that issue. You can get around that with varnishing, and it's still a very good colour aside from that. So it wasn't a kind of all speed paint's a bad video, but it was just be cautionary if you're used to using contrast the way I do in my painting videos. That's all it was about really. I have tested this Cloudburst blue, and it doesn't seem to have that issue, at least for the way I paint. A varnish is always helpful, but I don't tend to do that mid paint job. So I will be using the Cloudburst blue, and I think it's a really good alternative to Ultramarine, Contrast Ultramarine by Citadel. You could use either or. Now the blue is absolutely perfect as your base layer for all of the blue on their jackets. Now most of the blue on the jackets of these miniatures is on the back, because the fronts of the French jackets have white on, and there's lots of white straps and things as well, so most of the blue painting will be on the back. Right, so that's the blue on. Now the key thing when you're painting over a Zenithal highlight is to make sure as best as you possibly can to only get the paint where you need it to go, because as soon as you start putting colour over it already and then you have to paint over the top again, you're losing some of the benefit of the pre-highlight. Now I've done pretty well there. There's not too many oversplashes, and I tend to periodically go through the miniature and just touch up with a little bit of grey, usually, or a little bit of white, depending on where it is. Now the next stage I'm going to do is using Contrast Blood Angels Red, and I'm doing the 55th line. They have red cuffs and red collars. It's a fairly iconic look with the blue with the red there, so I wanted to go for something like that, and it's also a regiment that I'm going to be using for my own projects as well. And now I'm not going to do any little touch-ups yet, as I just mentioned, because the areas that I need to paint don't have any overspill on, so I'll wait a little bit more and I'll go and touch up anything I need to, maybe after I've done the red or some black or something afterwards. So just carefully now going in and adding the red in. Right then, so that's the red cuffs and collars in. There's little bits that need tidying up, especially around the collar, but not too bad, and I don't need to do that right now. So the next stage is I'm going to put the flesh on the faces, on the hands, and for that I'm going to be using Contrast Gulliman Flesh. Now you don't have to use that. You could use Darko Flesh, you could use the Fire Slayer Flesh, or even the Speedpaint's Crusade Skin. I've tried them all, they all work really, really well. It's just really for consistency, and I've been using the Gulliman Flesh for a while. You can also change them between different men, you could change them between different regiments. It really doesn't matter. Any of those contrast stroke speed paint style paints will work for this. And you're just allowing it to pool and letting the very light, the kind of the almost white pre-highlight do the job of giving you some natural highlights and shadows where it goes into the recesses. So the flesh is on and drying now. The next focus is going to be the shakos, but the non-black ones. So you may have noticed that some of these shakos are covered, and they can be identified by the little triangle and the face, the little sort of regiment plate there, not on show essentially because it's covered underneath the shako. And now they are a mixture of colours. You do a bit of research and some seem to be grey, some to be a lighter cloth. So I'm going to be using two colours for that. I'm going to be using Basilicanum Grey, and I'm going to be using Contrast Skeleton Horde. So next up is to do the muskets, and I'm going to be using Contrast Gore-Grunta Fur. Going to be covering the barrels as well at this stage. Now for the next part we're going to continue to use the Gore-Grunta Fur, and we're going to use it for their packs. Now as far as I'm aware, the French packs are made out of hide, and if you look at some pictures you actually see a bit of a change in tone where there's sort of a brownish fur or a whiter fur on there, and it's up to you really whether you'd want to achieve that on the back of the pack on these. On the Voltigeurs I did in the previous tutorial, I left the top flap a bit lighter just to give it a little bit of difference. There's many ways you can do it. You can also just go in like I'm going to do on this one here and just paint the whole thing in Gore-Grunta Fur, and over the Zenithal highlight you've got enough variation there and it looks quite cool as it is. But you can also paint it on slightly patchy and then paint in a lighter colour as well, so it's really, really up to you. So I'm probably going to do a couple where I leave segments almost white like that a little bit. So those bits are dry now, and then just to carry on with my madness, I'm using a little bit of Skeleton Horde, but thinned 50-50 with water, just over the little patchy bits that I've left. And as I said, I expect a lot of people will just completely ignore that, but I quite like the little bit of variation. I'm putting a very small amount and just slightly staining the area that was left white. And when everything else is painted in, I don't know, I just think it looks a little bit more like some of the hide packs that I have seen on some reenactors and things as well. But anyway, and that's that. Right. Next up is the hair. Now, there's no moustaches on any of this strip, though some of them have. So we can scoot straight around to the back and we can see what we're looking at here. So it's the hair that you can see beneath the shako and before the top of the blanket roll. Now, technically, you might even be able to see a little bit of collar to put a red line in for the collar. I don't think it's really there on the miniature, and I think it's needless to put it in, especially when you've added the colour for the hair. So you can go straight with the hair. It saves you a lot less work. Now, I like to stick to 3 colours just to keep it a bit of variety, but not to get stupid as well. So I always put some blondes in. So we've got the Nazdrag contrast yellow for that. We have a Gore-Grunta Fur again for a kind of reddish colour hair, and then I'm using brown with Wyldwood. Now, obviously, there would be black hair. Absolutely would be black hair, but because there's on all the miniatures, same with the British as well, there's a lot of black shakos, there's a lot of black webbing, bags, packs, etc. I'm trying to relieve the black out of it because it can blend in, especially with shakos. Now, obviously, with the French, there are a few shakos that are greys or with the covers, or even these kind of beige sort of colours. So you could maybe get away with black, but I'm just going to stick with those 3 colours. And all I do is I open up all the pots and just randomly work my way through the strip. So we're getting there now. We're reaching a stage where the majority of the base colours are down. We do still have a couple of significant ones, one being the black, which is coming up next. Then after that, there will be some metallics and a slight bit of detailing. So we're talking about the shako badges and the little pom-pom things on the top of their shakos as well. Now, in terms of the black, I'm going to be using contrast black Templar. Now, we've got a number of areas to hit, so all the remaining shakos I'm going to completely paint black, just avoiding the little pom-poms at the top. I will cover the shako plates because anything that's going to be covered with metallic paint, having a black base is never a bad thing. We've got shoes and boots at different lengths. I know there are maybe gaiters involved in these that could be a separate colour, but at this scale they're just all going to be black for ease. Then we have bayonet scabbards, which are going to be black as well. If we flick onto the back, we do have other bits as well, so cartridge boxes etc. that will be black. And any belts and webbing and things is white with this, so we're going to try and leave them as much as possible. But once we've done the black and we've done the metallics, we can go back and do that little tidy up I've been talking about. So the next stage is to add the first metallics, and that's going to be black metal from scale 75. And the idea is just to pick out the barrels and the bayonets. There's very little other metallics on these models that you need to pick out. The buttons and things are quite small, and we'll deal with that later on. And the shako plates will be a different colour, they'll be gold. So that's the next stage. We move on to using Scalecolour, Scale 75 paint again, and it's Necro Gold, and that's going to be the shako plates. There's just a couple of these that need picking out. So next bit we need to do is paint the pom-poms that are on the top of their shakos. Now these are quite interesting. Well, I say interesting. if I'm just going to pop a little image on the screen now, this is from a really useful website, Mont Saint Jean uniforms for Waterloo guide, and there's all the British and French uniforms on that. And if I try and remember to put a link in the notes for this video, I know it's in French, but you can change it to English usually with your browser. But what you'll see is that they're different coloured pom-poms depending on the company. So it's green for first, and blue for second, orange for third, and purple for fourth company. Now I'm going to make these orange for third company, and you've got a couple of options really. If you're going to go speed paint, go for the newer style. Well, you've got the Fire Giant orange, and then if you want to go with contrast, you can go with Gryph-hound orange. If you just want a painted orange, there are loads available out there, and because it's such a small area, you don't need to worry too much about it, whether it being contrast to get your natural highlight in there. When I tested this, I did a bit of a mix of both of those two, and there was very little difference, if anything at all. But I'm actually using the Fire Giant orange from Army Painter Speed Paints here. Now, the next stage now is to do that tidy up stage that I was talking about, and to go around and have a look to see if there's any parts I've missed. It's very easy to miss a hand here or there, or an epaulette there, or something like that. So I'm going to go back round. I know that I've already missed off the chin strap for the helmets, which I should have done gold when I did the plates. And you can only really see those on their left hand side of their faces, so I'm going to go down and do those. But what I'm also going to do is I'm going to be using grey Seer base. I'm going to go in and touch up anywhere where the blue shouldn't be or red shouldn't be on the white. So there's a little bit of overspill there for flesh. This strap on each of the arms should be a strap for the pack, for the so to make sure that that's white, not blue. Just little things like that. Now, you could also use white for that, specifically if you're not planning on going to do any further highlights afterwards. And then on the backs as well, there's turnbacks on the coats here that should be white, so I'm going to paint those in with grey. I'm just going to fill out the straps on the backs of the packs over the bedrolls, that kind of thing. And that's all the tidying up done. Now, you could leave it at this stage, maybe go in and touch up the white, which is probably something I would do anyway, but if you really wanted to get your armies on the table very quickly, this would look absolutely fantastic on the table. The reason I'm not adding the white now and sort of showing you what it would look like, what I would leave it as the basic tabletop stage, would just be because that's going to be the last thing I do in this process. So we are at a highlighting stage. And there's a fair few little bits to highlight, but we've done the bulk of the hard work, and we won't be highlighting every single colour. That's what the Zenithal highlight was there in the first place for, preparing the miniatures, so I won't be highlighting the black, for example. So what we're going to do is work on the blue jackets first, and there's a couple of paints that I've decided to use for the French. The first one is dark Prussian blue from Model Colour, and the second highlight is royal blue, also from Model Colour. So starting with the dark Prussian blue, we are going to go and just lift what is a very dark base on the blue, and I decided to go for that darker colour mostly because I wanted a rich colour to finish with. Ultramarine contrast, while it's dark, it doesn't cover quite as richly, which leaves you with a little bit of highlight, which is good, but it doesn't then take further highlights as well. This will end up being a lot neater. So it's a good sort of comparison to the way that the Blood Angels contrast red works on the British. Now, unlike the British, where there's quite a lot of red jacket on display, because of all the white on the front here as well, the blue doesn't pop very much with just one highlight, and that is why I decided to go for the secondary highlight using royal blue. Obviously, you really don't have to do this. You may even decide to skip the dark Prussian blue and go for the royal blue straight away, or another blue you have a little look in your collections and see what you've got available. But this really just helps it, lifts it and makes it pop, and will make it stand out as different from later paint schemes when thinking of Prussians coming soon, and them having a very, very dark blue as well. Just wanted to make sure that the blue that I use for the French stands out a little bit more. Now with the blue done, it's time to highlight the red. Now there's two parts to this actually, because I'm going to be doing the cuffs. I'm not going to worry about the collars too much because they're tucked in under the chin, but I'm going to be using the Citadel, Evil Sunz, Scarlet to do the cuffs. And then also on the cuff, you'll just see there's a little strip there, and that would often change colour depending on the regiment, I believe. At least for the 55th it is blue, so I'll be using some of the royal blue as well just to touch that back in, but I'll be doing it after I've highlighted the red because it's just easier that way. Next thing I'm going to do is just give the flesh a slight touch up. I'm going to use Vallejo Noctura Fairy Flesh for that, and the principle of this is just to pick out maybe noses and cheekbones, on top of a knuckle or something like that, because the faces can get a little bit lost after the wash. Obviously they're very, very small models, and while the detail is there, unless you draw the eye to it, they don't always stand out. I'm just going along dotting the noses to start with, and then I'll go along and do the cheekbones, and then just to the tops of some of the hands and things. Again, this is very much an optional process. So I now want to just do a very quick highlight on the covered shakos. They look a bit dull and dirty at the moment, and for the grey ones I'm going to be using a little bit of graphite grey from Scalecolour, Scale 75, and for the sort of tan coloured ones I'm going to be using some dark sand from Model Colour. And I've also got a little bit of white on my palette. Sometimes I feel like just adding a little bit of extra lightness to those. So we'll start off with one of the greys first. Now for the lighter colour ones, the same process, and you're really just doing a bit of a highlight along the top of the shako, and where you've got that little upside down V, that little triangle at the front there, just lifting it slightly. Like I said, I'm not going to be highlighting the black shakos or anywhere on the black, and the Zenithal highlight has given you a little bit of natural highlighting on the edges, and this Scarlet's going to be absolutely fine. If you wanted to, something like a graphene grey from Scale 75 would be perfect if you wanted to repeat the kind of thing I just did with the covered shakos there and just hit the edges of them. I may go back and do that at some point. I didn't with the British, and I think these will be fine without it once you've done the rest of it. I am going to go and do a quick highlight on the plates on the shakos. Initial take is just literally a dot of elven gold, again a Scale 75 colour. It's just a little bit dull at the moment, and I wanted to stand out, pop a little bit more, and those little details are the kind of things that really lift the paint job and draw the eye. Continuing with the metal highlights, now it's time to highlight your barrels and your bayonets. I'm going to be using Game Air Silver. This is a very bright silver. I use it as my main highlight in most of my metallics, and you'll see just shortly how bright it is. Now what I'm doing really is the top sort of 2/3, 3/4 of the bayonet on each side. And then for the barrel itself, I'm going to highlight each of the bands, and then do a little line in between them as well. And then just a little bit at the top where your hammer is, and your flint, etc., and just breaks it up and makes it pop a little bit. We're now on to the final and what is probably the most important part to make them pop and stand out and look a bit cool, and that's the white. So at the moment the white areas are very grey and go very dull, and there's two stages to it. So this is your highlight, is your model colour off-white, and we can also use the contrast Apothecary white as well, and that's essentially a shade for it, and that will be the preparation beforehand. Now this is already fairly grey and will highlight quite nicely, so I don't need an awful lot of this stuff, but if you've had to touch up quite a lot or your white is already quite white and flat, this is a really good way of doing it. So I'm going to add a little bit of this, but most of it is going to be highlighting with the model colour. So the Apothecary white contrast is effectively a grey glaze, I suppose, which you almost use a little bit like a wash. I'm just going to dab a little bit in these sort of central chest areas, so that it soaks in and shades around the detail there, where you've got cross straps going over a white front of the jacket, and some buttonholes and things like that as well. Now once that Apothecary white has dried, it's time for the final white coat, and I use model colour off-white a lot. I find it thins very well, it's not chalky. I'm not a huge fan of GW whites, Citadel whites, very hard to get a smooth finish with, so I thin this down quite a lot, and this is the bit that really kind of finishes it off. Now you want to go in and you want to pick out your cross straps. Parts of the jacket, but you want to also leave some of the grey behind as well. Just the tops of the trousers, and just sort of work your way along. I've started right in the middle here, but just work your way along, picking out the highlighted areas, and this just really makes a difference. This really makes it all stand out and look like white. And once you've done the white on the fronts of the miniatures, you just want to reinforce and pick out the straps on the packs and the backs of their trousers, and then the little turnbacks on their coats and things as well. And there we are. Once the white is done, you're essentially there. Then remember, this is a tabletop finish for the miniatures, and you're highlighting on those contrast based layers. So I will now get it all finished onto the full stand of the basing done, and you'll get the full effect, and we'll talk about it and close the video out. And there we are. So added onto the base using the normal basing scheme that I've been using. Now if you're new to the channel and new to the tutorials here, I will cover that off in the next video where I look at the command stand and the greatcoats in a little bit more detail. I won't actually show you how I did it, because that's pretty boring and most people do their own basing schemes, but it's using some Vallejo products, so some dark earth, thick mud, bit of agar shade, and some 2mm tufts with a few weathering powders and things on there as well, essentially. But anyway, that's the way I do the French. Hopefully that some of you have found that useful. I'm sure by now many of you have painted lots of your French, but those of you who haven't started yet or are thinking and getting into epic battles, hopefully you'll find this useful. I think I still prefer my British. I think I prefer the way the British come out, but I think this is more than possible for a tabletop version. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. If you haven't found the channel before and this is the first time you found it, there's a lot of other epic battles content on here, project vlogs, unboxings and reviews of most of the products. I've been very lucky that Warlord Games quite often provide me with stock a little bit ahead of time. in order to review it. There are lots of other painting tutorials as well, including the already mentioned British infantry tutorials. There's some Voltigeurs, which use a slightly different scheme for the blue, which you could also carry over onto the models you've done here. There's Riflemen, there's going to be upcoming cavalry soon as well, British and French, and I have some Prussians as well, so I'm already planning on doing some Prussian tutorials as well. I think the first one will be the Landwehr Infantry. Anyway, so thanks very much for watching. Consider giving us a like if you like the video, and consider subscribing, and I'll catch you soon.